Tens of thousands flee from multiple raging wildfires in California.
It's Armageddon. I'm driving through a war zone right now, and I don't even know what to say. I'm speechless. I'm shocked.
What role might climate change play, and should communities reevaluate habitability?
If they are naturally fire-prone areas, then that should be a consideration just as same as you live along a coast for hurricane or in a floodplain.
Today's Wednesday, January 8th, and this is The Issue from VOA. Hi everyone, I'm Lori London. Scott has the day off.
Any people in the house?
Fierce wildfires are raging in the Los Angeles area, with fast-moving flames burning through homes and businesses as tens of thousands of residents have been forced to flee.
I said, I'm just going to jump in the pool. I can barely swim, but I'm just going to, that's our only way out, because the canyon is literally on fire on both sides.
Many of the towering fires began Tuesday and were fueled by powerful Santa Ana winds that gusted more than 112 kilometers per hour in some spots. This resident describes the terrifying scene in the Pacific Palisades area before a neighbor helped her evacuate.
At the bottom of the canyon, there was cars piled on top of each other. There was boulders and debris that fell off of the canyon that was on fire, that was in the middle of the road where people had to abandon their cars.
And further hampering efforts, the winds persisted Wednesday, making it too dangerous for aircraft to attack the fires from the sky.
You could just tell the wind was erratic. It was blowing one way, blowing another.
As wildfires destroy homes and buildings in Southern California, experts warn that climate change is lengthening the state's fire season, in part by making dry vegetation conditions more common.
Destruction on this scale is not often seen in the month of January. The obvious impact of climate change in this situation is that the average number of days per year where the vegetation is very available for fire has doubled since the 80s. So the fire season has been growing longer and longer in California.
Lyndon Pronto is a former wildland firefighter who now works as an expert in fire management with the European Forest Institute. And as the planet continues to heat up, causing more and more extreme weather events, questions arise about rebuilding and habitability. Joining us for insights is Tim Brown, a research professor at the Desert Research Institute and director of the Western Regional Climate Center in Reno, Nevada. His expertise includes fire, climate, and weather conditions. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, happy to do it.
The intensity of what we are witnessing is just monstrous. Would you say this has become something that is unprecedented?
It is a combination of things that have come together in a way to make this an extreme event. From the weather perspective, there was a low pressure system over Arizona, a high pressure system over the eastern Pacific, and that combination funneled very strong winds over the region. And when they hit the mountain chain there, those winds then were accelerated downhill and strengthened even further. As far as unprecedented, the Weather Service was referring to this as the strongest event since December 2011. Yeah, it's certainly not an everyday common event.
Would you say that this is likely something that is driven to the intensity that it is in part by climate change? And how has climate change impacted a situation like this to become as extreme as it is?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to directly attribute this to climate change. Someone maybe will do what's called a climate attribution study and take a look at model output to see if there were influences from elsewhere around the globe that might have strengthened that low pressure, the high pressure, or to make that combination. But the other thing that's going on here is that it has been dry, very dry winter so far in Southern California. Everything has been up north, Northern California, the Pacific Northwest in terms of substantial rain. So what's referred to as live fuel moisture is well below average for the time of year. So that's part of the combination of here's these very strong winds now with very dry available fuels.
And would you say the drought and the dryness has something to do with the warming planet and global climate change?
Again, in this particular case, no, cannot say that. But in general, it is recognized, yes, that warming does exacerbate drought conditions. But to have a dry season is not necessarily unusual. But the fact that this is going to be a high-ranking early start, we refer to the water year in the West as October 1st is the beginning, because most of the precipitation happens between October and say through April. And this has been close to the driest start of the water year on record.
Has fire season expanded throughout the year to more than just fire season, whether in California or globally, due to climate change?
Yes, the season has changed, and especially in California, fire management here definitely thinks of it as year-round. I mean, here we're seeing very significant fires right in January. It was just a few years ago. They were occurring in December, and fire crews were working through the holidays, for example. So, yes, we're seeing more and more of that.
How do they get a handle on something like this when apparently there are water concerns and this thing is moving so fast and the winds are expected to pick up?
Yes, well, large fires like this, that's not unusual to be very difficult to contain. And for example, with the strong winds, that's going to limit very much any aircraft operations to help with suppression activities. A lot of times for events like this, the management perspective is really about safety, evacuation, more like structure protection or valuable resource kind of protection, as opposed to trying to put a line around the entire fire and, containing it that way. At some point, they'll be able to do something like that. But under strong wind conditions, it's fairly limited in terms of what you can do, what's called direct attack.
Right. It seems like it would be pretty dangerous. We're hearing 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts.
Yes, absolutely. It is dangerous, not only for the crew on the ground, but like I said, for aircraft operations as well, which are pretty much going to be grounded with those kinds of winds.
So what can we expect in the future for situations like this?
Yeah, we shouldn't be surprised if it happens again. I mean, it's always shocking to hear about loss of life and loss of homes, but I don't think it comes really as a surprise that we're seeing these events now, not just in the West Coast here, but globally as well. And that is related to climate change.
And so some of these places that are particularly prone to more fires, bigger fires, whether in California or globally, as you said, should people in general or communities in general think about rebuilding if the risk is continuing to go up, and habitability? And how do you see that playing out in the future for communities?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think what we should really do is rethink these urban fires. We call them wildfires, but in reality what's happening is it's a fire that started, say, in a vegetation environment and moved into a more urban area. But at that point, it's not a wildfire anymore. It's an urban fire. It might sound subtle, but it's an important distinction in the way of thinking. Because if you have extreme conditions, such as we're seeing this week in California, and that moves into a community that has non-fire resistant structures, materials, it's a very vulnerable community to fire. And so the only way to change that part of it is to have a community be resistant to fire, to reduce the level of destruction, that it does.
Yeah, I heard one person, a quote from one resident who said she had rebuilt her home in a fire in years past that burned to the ground, and now her house that she rebuilt has just burned down. So it makes you wonder, do you keep rebuilding in that same place where you're so fire prone?
Yes, and so that's another thing to keep in mind where many people are building. This is just population expansion and, plenty of reasons why folks will live in certain areas. But if they are naturally fire-prone areas, then that should be a consideration just as same as you live along a coast for hurricane or in a floodplain. There are ways to mitigate. There are ways to adapt to that. But it should definitely be on the minds of those living there.
Thank you very much again for your time. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
That was Tim Brown, research professor at the Desert Research Institute and director of the Western Regional Climate Center in Reno, Nevada. You've been listening to The Issue from the Voice of America. On behalf of Scott Walterman and all of us here at VOA, thanks so much for joining us. Follow The Issue on X, Blue Sky, and Facebook at VOA The Issue. And for news 24/7, visit our website at voanews.com. In Washington, I'm Lori London. We'll chat with you tomorrow.